So this video is going to focus on pads, namely how to use pads, when not to use pads, and some techniques that I like to employ when synthesizing and processing them. All right. So first, when to use pads. You always want to use pads as like a background element or a thing that goes under everything else. So for example, in this track I have here, there's pads. I think there's only one here. Yeah, it's this one. It's being used as a bed of sound or a drone, essentially. So if I take it out like that, you still get the main melody and everything around it, but you lose that foundation that everything rests on, and everything just has a lot less context. Speaking of context, you also want to use pads for melodic context, right? So I've got this melody here. Which is very, very simple. But I also have this pad going, which is, I think it's the same as this one, but just not rendered to audio. I don't know what I was doing. This is an older project. But when I put the pad back in, you notice that this melody here falls into the chord that this pad is playing, and it gives it a lot more context to rest on. Next, when would you not use a pad? So I would not use a pad as a melodic or element or any sort of foreground thing. As an example, I've got this section here, which continues on like that. And magically, in between takes, I've prepared this wonderful thing, which uses a pad from my track Grist, which will come out soon, hopefully. And you may notice that it uses the same MIDI as this. So here, let's compare what this sounds like versus what this sounds like using this as a melody. Now, I don't know, maybe for a 10-hour ambient album, that works very well. But to be completely honest, I'm not looking to make a 10-hour ambient album. I'm looking to make a 5-minute IDM track. So maybe I'll just stick with what I have here for now and not use pads as melodies. Another thing, when would you not use pads? Well, you wouldn't use it to fill out the space or the spectrum. So this is the same section, right? Which sounds not very, but it sounds empty. It's pretty empty. And let's say I want to fill out that space. I want to make it a bit more intense. You would not do that with a pad. If I were to do it with a pad, it might sound something like this. Which obviously doesn't sound bad, but it's just boring, and it sort of masks everything else that could be going on, right? So maybe I could fill out the space with something a bit more interesting, like some new percussion or some new drums. Who knows? There's a lot more possibilities than just a pad. Right, so this next part of the video is going to be about making pads and stuff that I do. I've written a list down on my desk of some things that I've got. So first on that list, importance of evolution. Let's see, let me decipher that. I'm going to guess that probably means modulation, a pad that changes over time, or a sound in general that changes over time, making it not boring. So I've got this patch here. It's just two sine waves. One of them is an octave below the other, going into a filter, a chorus, and a reverb. Two reverbs, actually, using Valhalla Supermassive, which is free, by the way, if you want to pick that up. And I'm modulating the cutoff of this filter with this envelope 2 right here. It sounds like this. So there's two things in this patch that are adding motion. There's the chorus, and then there's the filter. So if I were to turn both of these things off like that, it sounds similar, but it lacks that sort of upwards motion and downwards motion that you get when you have both of those things enabled, and it also has a click at the beginning, which is probably because the attack is not very long. But that's besides the point. Even the most subtle motion in your pads goes a very long way. Another example of this is in this patch here. I'm using a tool called Cardinal FX, which is like a modular thing. It's basically just VCV, but you can have it in plugin format without paying that $60 or whatever it is to do that. And there's a module in here from Mutable Instruments, it uses the same algorithm as Mutable Instruments, called Clouds, Mutable Clouds. It's this one here. It's basically a granular delay reverb thing, but it does a lot. So if I turn it off, it sounds like this. Turn it back on. And I've got this random modulator, these two modulators here, doing stuff to it. And if it weren't for these modulators, it would still have the reverb and you'd still have the delay, but it wouldn't be moving. Another really important thing is width and panning. So you may have noticed on a lot of these channels, I'm automating the pan. And that's because it's just another way to have movement, like I mentioned before. So in this one, not this one, which I've shown before, I'm automating the panning with this sine curve, and same for this one. And it's just like, all right, so if I remove the modulation automation for that, it sounds like this. Which, you know, is the same sound, but if I put the panning back, then when put with everything else, it just has more room to breathe. It's very slight, but it's just one of those other things. There's also the aspect of using simple waveforms in pads, which, you know, I get it. If you want to use a wavetable for more motion, then go ahead. I can't do anything to stop you. But I really like using simpler waveforms. So let's do an example. I have a new MIDI track. Let's put wavetable on it. Like this, one of my favorite synths in general. I'll put it to a sine. Maybe turn it down a bit. And then put a reverb on it. And a chorus. And a hybrid reverb. Let's put it on shimmer mode. And then do that. Sounds fine. Sounds okay. I can change the waveform to a different one on the wavetable. If I use something like more complex, let's say a piano, it just seems unnecessary to me, which may be different for you, obviously. I've said that a lot during this video, but I really like using simple waveforms and pads so that I can focus more on everything else that's going on, so that the listener can as well. All right, so finally, I'm going to be talking about some of the tools that I really like using when making pads. These are mainly for processing. Actually, I think it's entirely for processing. Yeah, all right, the first tool, Stranular. This is a granular effect by Kentaro. They're mainly a Master Live developer, but they've recently branched out into making actual VSTs. I'm using it here in this pad. I'm actually using two instances of it, but I'll just focus on this one for now. The interface looks like this. It's basically, you've got audio that goes into it, and each one of these dots that goes around is choosing a small point within that audio and just sampling it. So if I go forward here, the wet is being automated up. I have it so that the pitch of each grain is up an octave. The window looks like that, whatever. It's very, very simple, but it's also very effective when making these types of sounds. The next one is Pitch Loop 89, which not many people know about. I'm going to put it on my master. This one's specific to Ableton, just like Grain Delay. It's a Master Live effect. You can get it in a free pack if you have Live 11. I'll play it from here. Now it sounds relatively normal, but if I turn the position up, turn the random up, maybe turn up the feedback. Pitch a bit. It can get out of hand very quickly. That's what I love about it. I usually use it for making glitches or turning things up by an octave, but not using MIDI. So the last one is slight distortion and feedback, and I'm using it here, where I've got an effect rack that's feeding back into itself with an echo and a series of compressors. And every time it feeds back, I've got an overdrive being applied to the signal. So if I turn that feedback off, it sounds like this. And I feel like that type of feedback is really useful for adding just that extra bit of texture. I can't think of anything else to say. I think that's the end of the video. Make sure to subscribe and all that garbage. Thanks for watching.